This first lecture is based on the material in Rubin and Babby, Chapter 1. And where we're going to start is this question of why research? Why are you taking a course that is going to lay out the principles of the scientific method as applied in social work, how we understand the effectiveness of interventions, or how we understand the meaning behind particular forms of experience that people have, what risks people face in the world? Why do we engage in this process at all? Well, the whole point of science, from the point of view of social work, is to better understand the effectiveness of what we do, the experiences of our clients, and the risks that the world presents to our clients and the communities that we work in. And science enables us to strip away some of our personal biases, flaws in human thinking about the world, and have a more objective approach to making decisions about what's effective and what works. And throughout this course, we're going to be spending a lot of time trying to separate what we want to have happen, or what we believe should happen, or what we hope will happen, from what is actually happening. And this is the process of the scientific method as applied in social work. The scientific method and the process of understanding the world through a scientific lens is the best method we have available for separating beliefs that we might have before we come into an experience with the actual facts on the ground. What those facts are and how to understand those facts and what the meaning of those facts is a discipline called epistemology. And science is a particular way of dealing with these epistemological problems. Epistemology is the study of understanding, the study of knowing how we know. It's the study of how our understanding of the world is based either on interpersonal experiences or observational reality or other forms of knowing. And in the process of science, what we do is we break down our understanding of the world into a series of methodologically specific discrete steps. And by doing so, we are able to separate what our mere beliefs are, what our hopes are, what our expectations are, from what is happening in the world. Now that's a grand vision of how science works. It's a lot more messy and flawed in actual practice. But that's the idea. There are many ways of knowing. We have experience realities. So we observe things. You are observing this very boring video, for example. And in that process, you see me standing in front of, well, right now it's a green screen, but in the future of this video, it might be a fancier form of a picture or something like that. And you can see that with your eyes, and you have some idea of what you're looking at. We use observational realities all the time. As social workers, you might make community visits into homes, and you will look around the home and you will see, is this home safe for children? Are there electric appliances lying by bathtubs? Are there knives lying around on the floor? Is the house clean? Do people appear to be behaving reasonably well? There's a whole host of forms of observation that we as social workers use to understand our world, but we do it generally as well. We also have experience, and experience enables us to form an understanding of the world based on even limited observations. One of the pieces of research that I find very interesting is that as social workers, your most effectiveness will be relatively soon after you graduate, when you're still new at your job, because you don't have that much experience. And so you rely a lot on your observation. You rely a lot on what stories the clients are telling you. After you get more experience, you begin to develop templates for your clients, templates for the communities that you work in, and you apply those templates without listening as much to the individuals or the communities that you're working with, and you lose some effectiveness because you become more generic. Another example of an experience reality is intuition. Sometimes we go with our gut feeling. We have a sense of how this is going to go, which relates back to both observation and experience. Over time, we build up more intuitive capabilities. Now, all of these things, observation, experience, and intuition, are filled with potential sources of bias and flaws in thinking, and we'll talk about those in just a second. There's another way that we know things, and it's called agreement realities. Agreement realities are based on authority or tradition or even something that is commonly called common sense. So authority is somebody like me standing in front of a podium presenting information to you as an authority figure. You will have a lot of people in your life in the next several years that present themselves as authorities and tell you what a client's behavior means, or tell you what is actually going on in a community. Now, the truth of the matter is those authority figures are as flawed as the rest of us. Their information is not necessarily any better than the information that you have or the community members have or your clients have. But the authority imbues this sense of superior knowledge, which is one of the things we're going to be working against in this class. We're going to be trying to undercut that idea that authority represents a valid source of knowledge and have you spend more time thinking about empirical realities or observation-based realities. Another form of understanding of the world that gets in the way of good thinking is tradition-based understandings. We do this at this agency like this because that's the way we've always done things. That's not a good reason to do things. That's merely an explanation of why we're doing it, because we always have. And one of the strengths of the scientific method and the approach we're going to use in this class is to break down those sense of tradition into questions that we can then ask whether those traditions are based on valid information or they're based on mere convenience. And then finally, we often act in common sense, and it's often true that common sense is common but not very sensical. And again, we're going to try to think differently about these forms of understanding, and we're going to try and use empirical observation and research to call into question these authorities or traditions or common sense and get an actual understanding of what's happening on the ground. Again, I want to stress that this is a very idealized version of how science works. And one of the things we will discover as we go through this process is that science is very messy, and the forms of knowing produced by science are not going to clearly answer all of the questions. We're still going to have to think about the world, but we need to be aware that that we are constantly being thrown sources of information that don't have any validity or legitimacy from the scientific point of view. I've alluded to this a number of times in this brief little video, but there are problems with the way we as human beings perceive and understand the world. And the point of the scientific method is to provide a system of checks and balances to address these problems with human thinking. Humans are resistant to change. We don't like it when we have to do something new. We have inertia. We don't want to move if we don't have to move. And you encounter this all the time in agencies, where new information comes in that suggests the way we've been doing things isn't the most effective way possible, but people don't change their behaviors. And this is true across the board. This is true for medical doctors. This is true for nurses. This is true for social workers. This is true for lawyers. This is true for business people. Change is hard. And it's hard for us as practitioners to change the way we do things. We have very unreliable perceptions. I'll put a link in here for a video to a game where you watch a ball. And as you watch the ball, you will have, well, I encourage you to watch the video. But our perceptions of the world are often unreliable. When people actually go out and do these studies of eyewitness testimony, what they find is that eyewitnesses are subject to an incredible amount of bias. From the legal perspective, we trust eyewitnesses a lot, and that's a huge mistake because folks make all sorts of errors. They'll see something and at some point later in their memory, they'll have reworked the whole narrative so that what they recall has absolutely nothing to do with what they saw. And that's just the nature of being a human being. We overgeneralize. So one of the weaknesses of clinical knowledge is that we begin to see clients looking alike. We begin to see this client's behavior as the same as the last client's behavior, when in fact they're really totally different people. But one of the strengths of human thinking is forming categories. We do this with the DSM. The DSM is a great tool of overgeneralization and has some function and utility for us, but it also is a source of weakness, something that we have to be very careful of. We have selective attention. We see the things that we want to see in the world. We see the places where we're right and others are wrong. We're less likely to see the places where we're wrong and others are right. So we attend to things in ways that serve our own interest. And this is a huge source of weakness that we, from a scientific point of view, are going to try to address. We rationalize things after the fact. So an event will happen, and then at some point later we'll tell a story about how that event happens. Many of you will be involved in case conferences in which you will go through client set of behaviors and then you will attempt to explain those sets of behaviors. Many of you will do this as part of your training. And while it's useful to think and talk about clients, I think one of the things that we should be aware of as we're doing so is that this often has very little to do with the clients themselves and everything to do with our story about the clients, which are not necessarily the same thing.